It started with something that felt harmless, almost forgettable. We had exchanged polite nods for months, brief smiles that meant nothing more than shared walls and borrowed space. That evening, he paused longer than usual, asked how my day had been, and listened in a way that felt rare. When he invited me over, there was no drama in his voice, just an easy openness, as if the idea had come to him naturally. I hesitated for a moment, thinking of the life I was supposed to return to later, the routine I had already promised myself to protect. Then I told myself it was only a neighborly visit. Nothing more asterisk. His home carried a quiet warmth, the kind that settles into you before you realize it. It wasn't luxury or excess, just care objects placed with intention, a sense of order that reflected a man who valued stillness. As we sat, the initial conversation stayed safely on the surface. Work, the neighborhood, the small inconveniences of daily life. But there was an ease between us that softened the edges of those topics, and slowly the talk drifted toward heavier things. He spoke about moving far from where he grew up, about how distance can reshape a person without asking permission. I listened, feeling a strange familiarity in his words. Asterisk, I found myself responding with more honesty than I usually allow. I talked about feeling unseen in my own life, about how commitment sometimes becomes a quiet room where no one checks if you're still breathing. I didn't frame it as complaint, just truth. He didn't interrupt or rush to fix anything. He simply acknowledged it, and that simple recognition landed deeper than I expected. It felt good to be heard without being judged, to speak without rehearsing every sentence in my head. Asterisk, as the evening stretched on, I noticed how easily the conversation slipped into personal territory. We laughed, not loudly, but in that restrained way that suggests understanding rather than amusement. I caught myself relaxing, shoulders lowering, guard loosening. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a warning flickered. This comfort was arriving too quickly, too smoothly. I reminded myself that connection does not automatically mean danger. Still, the awareness lingered. Asterisk, he shared moments of his own loneliness, the kind that doesn't announce itself but settles into routine. There was no bitterness in his voice, only acceptance. That calm made it easier for me to speak freely, to admit that I had been carrying doubts I never voiced at home. I didn't mention names or details, but the meaning was clear. I was standing in a space where emotional honesty felt safer than it should have. Asterisk, time passed unnoticed. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because the conversation flowed without friction. I became aware of how rarely that happens, how often we rush through words just to fill silence. Here, silence felt earned, even comfortable. In one of those pauses, I realized how close we had become physically without intention, how the distance between us had shortened naturally. It wasn't alarming, just noticeable. Asterisk, that was when the guilt surfaced more clearly. A quiet reminder of promises made elsewhere, of boundaries I had drawn, and was now slowly erasing with each open confession. I told myself I was still in control, that nothing improper had occurred. Yet a part of me knew that control isn't only about actions, it's about intention. And my intention, however innocent it pretended to be, was drifting. Asterisk, he asked a simple question about what I wanted from life, not pressing, just curious. I struggled to answer because the truth felt too exposed. I spoke carefully, choosing words that wouldn't fully betray how conflicted I felt. He nodded, as if he understood even what I didn't say. That understanding felt like a hand placed gently on my back, guiding me somewhere I hadn't planned to go. Asterisk, when I finally stood to leave, there was no dramatic farewell. Just a shared look that lingered a second too long, heavy with unspoken awareness. Walking back, I felt unsettled, not because anything obvious had gone wrong, but because something essential had shifted. I had crossed no visible line, yet I knew I was standing closer to one than I had ever intended. I told myself I wouldn't go back so soon. Yet the days that followed felt unfinished. Every time I returned home, my thoughts wandered to that quiet room and the ease of being understood without effort. When we met again, it was casual, almost accidental, but the familiarity between us had already changed. There was no need for long introductions or cautious conversation. We spoke as if a thread had already been woven and only needed tightening. The evening deepened in a way I didn't anticipate. Words became softer, more deliberate. He asked questions that weren't invasive but revealing, and I answered without the usual filters. I was aware of what I was doing, aware that I was choosing honesty with him while practicing restraint elsewhere. That realization brought a dull ache of guilt, but it didn't stop me. Instead, I leaned into the comfort, telling myself that emotional closeness was not the same as betrayal. Asterisk, we shared something simple, unimportant itself, yet it carried weight because it was shared. I noticed how attentively he watched me, not with expectation, but presence. That kind of attention can feel intoxicating when you've grown used to being taken for granted. I found myself comparing that attentiveness to the absence of it in my own relationship, a comparison I knew was unfair but couldn't ignore. The contrast sharpened my dissatisfaction. Asterisk, at one point, our conversation slowed, leaving space between sentences. The silence was no longer neutral. It felt charged, filled with questions neither of us asked aloud. I became acutely aware of how close he was, how easy it would be to bridge that small distance. My heart beat faster, not from desire alone, but from fear of what crossing that line would mean. I shifted slightly, creating space, and he noticed. He didn't comment, but the awareness lingered between us. Asterisk, he spoke then about a past relationship that had ended quietly, without dramatic betrayal, just gradual emotional absence. His words mirrored thoughts I had been carrying for months. Hearing them spoken aloud made my own feelings feel justified, almost validated. I recognized the danger in that validation. It made my dissatisfaction feel reasonable, even inevitable, rather than something to confront honestly. Asterisk, I admitted that I felt torn, though I didn't name the cause. He listened without offering advice, without framing me as right or wrong. That neutrality made it easier to continue, to stay in that space longer than I should have. The more we talked, the more I felt as though we were sharing something private, something that belonged to us alone. Secrecy, I realized, doesn't always arrive as a conscious choice. Sometimes it grows naturally from comfort. Asterisk. There was a moment when our hands nearly touched. It was accidental, brief, yet it sent a clear signal through me. I pulled back instinctively, laughing it off, but my reaction betrayed the tension I was trying to hide. He met my eyes, and for a second, everything else faded. The possibility of crossing into something irreversible hung heavily in the air. I knew then that the boundary was no longer abstract. It was present, tangible, waiting. Asterisk, I excused myself soon after, claiming tiredness. As I left, the familiar guilt returned, stronger this time. I replayed the evening in my mind, analyzing each word, each pause. I hadn't done anything that could be easily condemned, yet I felt exposed. I understood that I was nurturing something I didn't intend to explain or share with anyone else. Asterisk, back in my own space. I tried to ground myself in routine, but the sense of imbalance persisted. I thought about how easily emotional intimacy had formed, how quickly trust had replaced caution. I realized that I was standing in the middle of a choice, not yet made, but increasingly unavoidable. The comfort I felt with him was no longer innocent, and denying that truth only deepened the tension. Asterisk, by the time I lay down to rest. One thought remained clear. Whatever this was becoming, it could no longer stay undefined. I had allowed the lines to blur, and even without a single decisive act, the distance between loyalty and temptation had grown dangerously thin. I tried to stay away after that, but avoidance only sharpened the pull. The more I told myself to be sensible, the louder the curiosity became. When we spoke again, there was no pretending this was still casual. The air between us felt heavy with everything we hadn't said, everything we were trying not to want. I was aware, fully aware, that I was stepping closer to a decision that would not be undone by excuses or good intentions. Asterisk, we talked less this time, but every word carried weight. There was no need to revisit stories or build connection, it already existed. What stood out was how easily my resolve weakened. I felt tired of resisting feelings I had already allowed to grow. That exhaustion became its own justification. I told myself that one honest moment would clear the confusion, that clarity would somehow restore balance. It was a lie I wanted to believe. Asterisk, the closeness felt different now. Not rushed, not aggressive, just deliberate. I noticed how my thoughts drifted away from consequences and settled on sensation, on the calm in my chest. The quiet certainty that I was wanted in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. That certainty felt dangerous because it offered comfort without responsibility. I recognized that comfort for what it was, yet I didn't step away. Asterisk, when the moment came, it wasn't dramatic. No sudden movement, no dramatic pause. Just a shared understanding that resistance had reached its limit. I felt my heart race, not from excitement alone, but from the awareness that I was crossing a line I had promised myself I wouldn't. The choice was mine, completely and undeniably. That knowledge didn't stop me. If anything, it made the decision feel heavier, more intentional.